supposed to pick up at Exodus chapter 20, and we're going to be talking more detail about the laws of God. You know, last week we finished up chapter 20, and we talked about the Ten Commandments being given orally, and we're not going to go back through that because we spent a lot of time on that, being given orally to Moses and the people were afraid and said, we want Moses to speak unto us, we don't want God to speak to us anymore. So this is what we're going to start seeing, is God is going to speak to Moses. Now it's going to be a few chapters before Moses actually goes up in the mountain to get the Ten Commandments on stone for the first time. And then of course he's going to come down, the people have gone off into idolatry, and the tables of stone are going to be broke. So we got that up and coming. One of the things too that you're going to find fascinating up and coming is, Daniel, can we turn that on? Okay. Up and coming is the fact that Aaron, along with Nadab and Abihu, and some of the elders, when Moses goes up to formally get the Ten Commandments, they're going part the way up the mountain with Moses. Now, they're not going to be allowed to go into the cloud. Only Moses is going to be allowed to go into the cloud. But what you find real interesting about all this is when Aaron makes that golden calf and Nadab and Abihu offers that strange fire, really, they knew better. Because the statement's going to be made that they saw the presence of God. They didn't see God, but they saw the presence of God about halfway up the mountain, and then Moses goes on up. So we got a lot of exciting things coming up with this. And so it's fair to say that the Ten Commandments really was the beginning of the law. It's God's moral and principle law in summation, okay? Now we're going to get into more of the hard facts of the law. Daniel, it looks like you need to hit, there you go. Okay, all right. Modern electronics, you know. But we got it going on. We got our Chief Information Systems Officer on the job this morning. Our CIO, he's on it, so that's good. We talked about, too, when we closed out chapter 20, about a matter of perspective. You know, we talked about from the perspective of the entire Bible, we can say that the law of God has three great purposes in usage. We talked about it being a guardrail, keeping the humanity on a moral path. We talked about it being a mirror, showing us our moral failures and need for a Savior. And it's a guide, showing us the heart and desire of God for His people. So we talked about all those things, and that's a summation of what we're talking about. We also briefly talked about an overview of Exodus 21. It contains a lot, okay? Any one of the laws that's going to be given, we could spend a lot of time on those laws. It's almost like being a lawyer and going to school to be a lawyer. You have to think about Gamaliel, a doctor of the Jewish law. Well, not only was he aware of the Ten Commandments, but he was aware of the depth of the law, okay? There's a lot, okay? It's kind of like the laws in our country. You know, we know a few of the basic tenets of our laws, but when you get into it, there is volumes of books and libraries wrote on the subject of our laws. So it is here. We're only getting a snippet, okay, of what's going on. But anyway, now at the close of chapter 20, Moses now is going to go up in the mountain to get further instructions because the people don't want God speaking to them anymore. Exodus 20 and 21. So we find, as we start this chapter, here's some of the laws we talked about. Exodus 21:1, laws for the judges. 2 through 4, laws for slavery. And that's going to be a real interesting subject that we're going to spend a little bit of time on because there is some controversy over the Bible and slavery. This is going to remove controversy because it's very plain what that is. Servitude, being a servant, okay? Think of the British aristocrat system and the servants that they do. Very similar in nature. Makes you wonder if some of that wasn't patterned after what's said here, okay? marriage and servitude or slavery, murder and manslaughter, capital offenses, personal injury law to free men and slaves. Yeah, workers' compensation is what we call it today. Now, how about that? You don't think about those things, do we? Workers' compensation. How about making restitution? I don't think we think about that. Y'all used to be in this country when property damage was done or something like that, what was the perpetrator required to do? Make restitution, right? Pay for what was done, right? Okay? And what about, here again, getting back to workers' compensation, what about personal injury, here in particular, on the job? So the personal injury, free men and slaves, kind of takes on one stance. The personal injury on the job takes on another. So this is what we're going to be looking at this morning. And this is kind of a different overview to it, kind of the same thing that we talked about before in some of the opening remarks, and because of time constraints, I won't go back through that. So, Adam Clarke said this, and it's real interesting as you study this. These different regulations are as remarkable for their justice and prudent as for their humanity. Their great tendency is to show the valuableness of human life, the necessity of having peace and good understanding in every neighborhood, and they possess that quality which should be the objective of all good and wholesome laws, the prevention of crime. I thought that was very good when I came across that. That's well said, because this is what this is all about. Is these laws and commandments God has. He wanted every neighborhood to possess that good quality and be wholesome with the laws they had in the prevention of crime. So God in His wisdom, He knew there was going to be problems within these people, didn't He? So He set them up their set of laws. Now when you go out, and maybe sometimes I'll do this, when you go out and look at the world around about them, there were several codes of law that had been created by men. You have the Samaritan Code of Law, which was created basically by Sargon, an early ruler along about this time, maybe a little bit forward. You have the Hammurabi Codes and others. So there were laws and regulations out there. Now, Daniel, I think we alluded to when we talked about Moses and the firstborn under Mesopotamian law, if you really held it to the law, Ishmael was the son that should have received the inheritance. You know why? He was the firstborn. So therein lies an issue with all of it. God's way versus man's way, Brother Griffith. God said, no, this is of a bondwoman. I want Isaac to be. And we talked about that in great deal. So you can see there were laws out there in the surrounding communities and among these other nations. But these laws were given to the Jews because this is through the lineage that Jesus Christ is going to come. And like I say, it's very interesting when you get into these things. In Exodus 21, in verse 1, kind of an overview of the laws given to judges. So let's go there and just read that, 21 verse 1. Notice what it says. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. So, here he's talking to Moses, but we also know that there are going to be judges over each tribe of the people. That was good advice that Moses was given by his father-in-law. And we talked about that. You can't do this by yourself. You can't judge all these people. You set up a hierarchy or system of judgment. It's kind of like this. Moses is, I guess, what you would call the supreme judge of the Supreme Court, okay? But under it, you have other court systems, don't you? And overseers, okay? And so each overseer or each judicial judge or circuit judge has his own area of people that he takes care of. And so it is. And so he's going to reveal this to Moses. Moses is going to give it to the people and set it before them. And we're going to find that the judges were responsible, if we get that far today, for helping carry out these various laws. So we have ordinances and laws we're going to be given to judge the people by. Let me back there just a second. In Exodus 2 through 4, we're going to find a general law for Hebrew slaves are servants. And like I said, we're going to spend some time on this because there's a lot of controversy over this out in the world about condemning slavery, blah, blah, blah. The Bible set up slavery, blah, blah, blah. No, it didn't. Let me get that real clear right now. No, it did not. It regulated servitude. There are 3 to 4 ways you could become a servant in a household. And we'll get to that in just a minute, okay? Remember the value of human life. God saw the value of human life in all the Hebrew people. Did they practice what we would call ball and chain slavery in other cultures? Yes, they did. It is flatly condemned in the Bible. It is called kidnapping. The Bible is real plain on it. We'll get to book, chapter, and verse on that, okay? And there is a severe penalty for kidnapping and selling people. It's very plain when you get to it. But before we get there, notice what it says here. If thou buy a Hebrew servant 6 years, he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. So here again, a regulation is being put in place. He's already told them this thing is not going to be like you were slaves in Egypt. You know, when you were slaves in Egypt, you were under the whip of the taskmaster, right? So it was a very bad situation. When it says slavery over there, guess what it meant? The Egyptian rulers were ruthless in that matter. And of course we see that as Moses tried to deliver his people, didn't he? And so we find that he would serve for 6 years, and then after 6 years of servitude, what would happen? He would go free. Okay? So if you are like for a better term, ball and chain slave, guess what you don't get to do after 6 years? Go free. Okay? So these things are going to be regulated by God on this servitude. And if he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go with him. So it recognized the family unit. Under the traditional type of slavery as we think of it, what does it do? It breaks up the family unit, doesn't it? Kids may be sold to one master, women may be sold to another, the father may be sold to another. So it is a very hurtful and very disgusting, if you will, situation that the world put itself in, and it all came about because of sin, and that's another story here. And if his master had given him a wife, and she hath borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. So there was a stipulation in this, that if the master provided him for a wife, and there was offspring and a wife involved, then they stayed, and the man could go out. But you're going to see what usually happens is what's called indentured servitude is going to come into play. And historians tell us most likely, from what they can tell, most stayed and became indentured. And there's something else you're going to see in this. A man could purchase his way out of this. So there was money involved. You know, slavery, as we know it, involves very little money to the people, doesn't it? So this thing was highly regulated to prevent injury and hurt within the family of God. Okay? Now, as you research this, aren't you going to find that somewhere on the outlying outskirts of this that some of the Hebrews, God's people, did do some slavery things? They did. Not approved of God. And it was problematic. You don't do that. Okay? That's why the sentence for this is so severe when we get to that part of it. And so we find, as we look at this in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 14, like I say, as we get into this, Brother Griffith, we could spend probably years right here in chapter 21 taking a close examination of these laws. And we ain't even got to chapter 22 involving the tabernacle and all that. Okay? So it is a very extensive and very detailed set of laws when you get into it. Deuteronomy chapter 4, and I forgot what I said, verse 14. I'm going to begin at verse 12. And the Lord spake unto you, spake unto who? The Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire on the mountain. Okay? So the Lord is speaking, You heard his voice, but you saw no similitude. What did he say? You heard the voice, you saw the fire, but you didn't see God. You heard and seen all these things, and ye heard a voice. And he declared unto you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, even the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. So see, it's kind of looking at the 10 Commandments as the beginning point of the opening chapter, if you will. They're very important that you remember them. And notice what he says here. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgment, that ye might do them in the land wherein ye go over to possess it. So not only was these laws going to be while they were wandering out in the wilderness, but it was going to be utmost importance when they got into the land. Why is that? Because of the nations that's in the land, the bad habits you can pick up from in the land and the surrounding, especially if you don't do what God commands. And what was that? You go in and you utterly destroy. What does that mean? Utterly destroy. Completely get rid of it. Men, women, children, even the cattle, the chickens, I want it all gone. Now that physically happened in the old Bible. What's that telling us today spiritually? How much sin does God want left in our lives? 0. All of it. Gone. Why? A little leaven does what to the whole lump, Jeremy? Makes it rise, don't it? It corrupts it. That's why he was very specific in his commands that you do those things, that you get rid of it. And I'm going to have to pause for just a minute and let some of you brethren talk about some of this. Add to it.
Jeremiah 34:14 is a direct quote.
Yeah.
Of the same thing we got here in Exodus.
Right. Yeah.
Direct. He
Yeah.
said, I made a covenant with
Yep.
you when I brought you out of Egypt.
Right. And
That covenant's still in effect till this day.
yeah, several hundred years after all this was given, there you have the prophets. Here again, as you get into this, you're going to find it restated for them to remember over and over. Why? Because they had a tendency to forget, didn't they? It didn't take them long after Moses went back up into the mountain, after he came down to get the 10 Commandments wrote on stone. What did they do? Built a golden calf. One preacher said he could imagine it went like this. That was probably one of the biggest desert parties you ever seen, Brother Griffith. Okay? You can imagine what all went on. Okay? So it didn't take them long, did it? So these laws and ordinances were given very sternly and to be in place. With ancient Israel, as in the entire ancient world, there were people who worked for others on the principle of servitude. They were slaves in some sense, but not necessarily in the brutal and degraded sense most think of slavery. Okay? So you're going to see that, and I can't emphasize that enough about this. Because like I say, when you get to talking to people and you listen to the media, there's a whole lot of rhetoric said about it and very little fact given. You know, most of this time when it's being talked about, and we're going to do a series of lessons prayerfully in the future on being objective or subjective. Well, when you look at a lot of that rhetoric and you examine it for fact, it is very what? Subjective. The term subjective means it is influenced, that your opinion is influenced by what? What you want, your taste, and your desires. That's a subjective statement, okay? To be objective means you're not influenced by anything but the facts. Self is out of it. And therein lies the problem with a lot of this. There are things that people would like to have and want to have that's not necessarily the fact. It's not objective. It is very subjective. So it's not like what we think of slavery has this unfolded. Okay? General laws for Hebrew slaves and servants, we read 2 through 4 just now. It is significant that the first words of this section of law in the book of Exodus shows that God wanted Israel to respect the rights and dignity of servants. See where it's going? They're Hebrew just like you are. They're human just like you are. The first words of God from Sinai had declared that he was Jehovah who brought them out of slavery. So they were actual slaves in Egypt. Jeremy?
You say it actually set its rules for both sides. Those that would be deemed the master, those that would be in servitude, because it could be abused either way, but especially on the
Master side.
right.
And it's going to get into that. We find that even under, and I'll have to refer to the British system because that's the closest thing I know of to what this kind of paints a picture. There may be others, but that's only what I know of. Even in that system, sometimes there were people that worked for them under servitude that were abused, right? Sometimes verbally, physically. So it can happen, can't it? But God's got a stern warning for them that do that. Okay? And it ain't pretty. Okay? And so we find that this is a remarkable code. The first persons whose rights are dealt with are who? Slaves. Isn't that interesting? Servants. Why? Because they readily could understand what God is doing because they had been what? You know, this is a liberating statement that you got here. When you look at it, there's only been one true liberator of mankind across the board. You know who that is? God. God is liberating physically the children of Israel here from the old types of slavery as they knew it. And he's putting a system in that demands respect and dignity. I'll say this, and this is a whole other study. Do you know who the greatest liberator of women is? Any of you gentlemen want to guess? I can tell you right now it's not NWO, okay? I'll give you a hint. That's the National Women's Organization or the National League of Women. It's not those, okay? I'll give you a little hint. God. And you're even going to see it in this. You know, he regulates how men are to treat their wives, doesn't he? And how he meant it to be was in the beginning because the word there is a help meet. M-E-E-T. And we know what a meeting is, don't we, Daniel? Because we've attended our fair share of them, haven't we? Okay? It's different disciplines. In this case, the husband and wife coming together for what? A common cause. Jeremy, just like you guys have meetings, don't you? Of the various disciplines, okay? And what are you doing in that meeting? You're coming together for what? A common cause. And in man and, yeah.
Greater good, more of an impact.
Exactly. For the greater good, right? So husband and wife come together under God's law as one for various reasons and to produce. There it is. Okay? Anyway, that's another lesson within itself. I kind of got off on a tangent there because when you get into these laws, it's real easy to get sidetracked with them, okay? We find that as we look at this and as it unfolds, there are four basic ways a Hebrew might become a slave or servant to another Hebrew. One, and I'm not going to turn there for the constraint of time. I can also email you this and get you copies of this, okay? One is, in extreme poverty, they might sell their liberty. Leviticus 25 and verse 39. Remember, a lot of this in Exodus, we have to go to other parts of the Bible to get a better picture of what's going on. And so it is with this. A father might sell a daughter as a servant into a home with the intention that she would eventually marry into the family. And we'll see this in Exodus 21:7. In the case of bankruptcy, a man might become a servant to his creditors, 2 Kings 4:1. If a thief had nothing which to pay proper restitution, then he could go into servitude and he can pick up the bowl. Exodus 22:3-4. It's kind of interesting. And that's basically the four ways in which they got into servitude. Let me ask you a question about this. Have you seen kidnapping involved yet? Mm-mm. You won't. And when you do hear what you get into this, God like, we ain't playing this, okay? So, as we can see already, this is getting more into servitude, and I know it seems like I'm a little redundant on this, but you have to remember that the influence that the world has had, outside and even in the church, if you don't take time to stop and look and study these things and what's going on, it leads to a lot of confusion sometimes. So the idea of man stealing and lifelong servitude, the concepts many have of slavery, simply do not apply to the practices of slavery in the Old Testament. Normally, as we've seen, slavery was what? Chosen or mutually agreed upon, of limited duration. How long? 6 years, then you go free. Now, if you want to stay, as we get to the end of this chapter, you can stay. You go before the judges. They approve you stay. You go to a doorpost, and they would awl a hole in your ear. And what that denoted was that you were a servant to this master for life. You could do that. And a lot of people did that. Okay? So you find that it's not like what we think of normal slavery. And it's highly regulated. And there's a reason for that. And also, it's going to get into these laws, and I thought this was real interesting, about the responsibility that these judges had toward old people versus young people to keep young people from putting euthanasian practices in place. Now, how about that one, Jeremy? We don't think about that, do we? Because young people get dissatisfied with us old folks and what they want us doing. Put out of the way, right? Not under God's law. And what you're going to start to see as this unfolds, a lot of the things that God instituted here to them, of course, a lot of it by nature went into the world around about them, we still use today as a principle and basis of laws. It's amazing, isn't it, at what God has put into place. As it says here, this person was more properly an indentured servant bound for 6 years. And there we are. That's more or less what it was. And that's what he's talking about here. Exodus 21, 5 through 6. Let's see if we can. Any of you brethren have any comments you want to make on that? Bobby, you got any thoughts about it or anything? Yeah. Where am I at?
People today don't know. When you hear somebody talking about slavery today, they think that's the most awful thing ever mentioned.
Right.
But they don't realize that the Bible is full of it. And
Yeah.
the Bible justifies it to a point.
Yeah.
It's to a point it is justified.
Yes, yeah. But you had to think about that point. Servitude.
It has to be according to God's law.
Exactly.
But they don't know that.
They don't know that because the picture we get painted is what we've always seen, right? Slaves. Somebody runs off somewhere to another country, loads up a boatload of people against the will, does a lot of slaughtering and killing, chains them, brings them over, puts them on the platform, auctions them off. The father goes this way, the mother goes this way, the children goes this way. It's just one big filthy mess, isn't it? And that's the picture we get. I'm going to tell you something. Sometimes I go out and look at some of the world news in other countries. It ain't been that long ago. A certain group of, I can't remember their name, of Egyptians ran down to Ethiopia, and guess what they done? They got them a truckload of slaves. Does it still go on? Yes, it does. More prevalent than what you think. Okay? So, it goes on. So every once in a while, mainstream media, and I say it that way because there's a big difference between what is actually going on in the world and what's portrayed here in the U.S., they don't really pick up on all that because they like the other part. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, we have a modern version of it. It could say if somebody does contract work or if they've been enlisted in the military, it sets boundaries for both sides, rights.
There you go. There it is again.
So
That's
Or
right.
even a mortgage agreement, or a car loan, or whatever.
That's it. That is a milder form, but that's right. The people that I worked for 40 years, okay? Well, 20 years with one company, 18 with another plus. But anyway, what was I? Really? I was an employee, which is a fancy term for what, Jeremy? So I was bound by who and what I done. The supervisor or the master, right?
He's the master, and you're the servant.
That's right. So what's changed?
Yeah.
Okay? You know, in some ways, and I'll say this, and I don't want to get, the church is not a political organization. We shouldn't dabble in that. We should leave that alone. But anyway, I sometimes wonder if the power of the pen is a lot stronger than chains. You have to think about that one now. That's just coming from Bobby, but think about that one. The power of the pen stronger than the bondage of chains. Think about that for a while. So, we find in Exodus chapter 21, verses 5 through 6, notice what it says here. And we briefly touched on this, and here we go. And if a servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. How about that? And you can find some other passages of Scripture, like in Leviticus, and I'll give you a little more detail on that. But here again, like I say, Greg, I could get right here, and I could stay a while, okay? I could stay so long, somebody be saying 10 years from now, I wish he'd move on out of Exodus 21. There's not any other books in the Bible. Okay? Okay. So this guy entitled would become a bond slave, okay? And willing slave for life. No, you know what the key word is in all that? Willing. Not against his will. It says he loves his master, he loves his wife, he loves his children. He's in it for the long haul. Everything's good. He likes the servitude that he's doing. Sounds like the master will take care of me real well and things of that nature. And guess what? He becomes a willing servant for life. But the servant plainly say, I love my master. If, after the 6 years of servitude, the servant wished to make a lifelong commitment to his master, in light of the master's goodness and his blessings for the servant, he could, through his ceremony, make a lifelong commitment to his master. Have you ever worked for somebody that when they got promoted or they moved on to another job, you hated to see them go? Yeah, I have. More than once, believe it or not. That's what it's talking about here. There are good masters, aren't there? And there are those that you're glad they move on. Right? Yeah. I had plenty of them too. Anyway, that's another story. Those that have worked out in the public world know what I'm talking about. So that bondservant's a willing slave for life. The judges and changed the slave status from a temporary to permanent by this ceremony at the master's house. So it could be changed like that. And here again, I didn't get into that part of it. We could go there, but I'm trying to condense this down so we can kind of cover it, okay? His master shall pierce his ear with an awl, as we talked about. In the ceremony, the servant's ear was pierced open with an awl. This was done in presence of witnesses, and he shall serve him forever. So I think we covered that pretty good. A little bit of redundancy here. Because of the fact that it is such a controversial subject, if you haven't studied it, and the people out in the world, isn't it? It's very controversial, okay? But when you look at it, as you look at it like we're looking at it now through the eyes of objectivity, guess what you see? What's the fuss? What's all the commotion about? Don't you know the word? You know? What's going on here? So anyway, verses 7 through 11. I got to ring the bus. We might not get as far as I wanted to. Okay, here we're going to get into this part about a man, if you will, selling his daughter into maid service, okay? And if a man sell his daughter to be a maid servant, she shall not go out as the male servants do. Okay, there's going to be some reasoning for this. And if she please not her master, who is talking about a betrothal here, okay? Because we've got to put this in context. Being betrothed, or a type of engagement, Jeff, if I understand that correctly, okay? It's a type of engagement. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. So that was highly regulated. If it came about that situation did not work out, she could be redeemed or bought back. That's what the word redeemed means. But you cannot engage her in slavery. Okay? He's pretty plain on that, isn't he? You shall have no power to sell her to a strange nation. Okay? And I got to go through what? Verse 11. If she take him another wife, if he takes him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. Even if he took another wife, and this betrayal or betrothal didn't work out, what was he supposed to do? You got to take care of it. And you see that of controversy in the world today, don't you? A lot of times when a man or wife leaves their family, first thing they do is get in the fuss of upkeep, don't they? You know, who's going to do what, who's going to get the kids and all like that. Bible pretty plain. If that betrothal or that engagement doesn't work out and you marry another one, guess what you got to do with her still? You got to provide her what? You got to provide her with food, her raiment, and so on and so forth. And if he do not these things unto her, if he do not these three things unto her, then shall she go out without money. She can leave. She can go. So see, she was not totally what you call bound in this picture issue. The master had certain what, Brother Con? Responsibilities, didn't he? And if he doesn't fulfill his responsibilities, then she can go. You see how this is being regulated out of what we see in the world today? That does not diminish his responsibility. If a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, the matter described here seems to describe the selling of a young female as a slave to a family with the intentions of marriage. This is why the text explains who has betrothed her to himself. Now, I'm trying to remember how this go. I'm not too much involved in having an extreme knowledge of weddings and dowries and stuff like this. It seems like this is what it's talking about. You know, a lot of times there's dowries involved for marriage to take place and all this kind of stuff, okay? Sometimes the KJV and Jeff, I didn't look, a lot of times I don't look at the ESV or others. It may say something a little different, but that's what it's talking about, and that's what it's getting at. He shall let her be redeemed. If a master did not marry her and decided not to give her to his own son, the master was still obligated to respect her rights under God's law. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? You know? Could use a strong dose of that today, couldn't it? Where am I? The right of a parent to sell his daughter was carefully guarded against abuse. Okay? So, those things went on, okay? But notice how God regulated these things. And guess what? I got to stop right here. We're going to do this one, then I'll have to stop, and we'll pick up here next week because I got to ring the bus and get ready for worship. This is a subtle yet important difference between slavery as it was, it is, commonly practiced, and slavery or servitude as regulated in the Bible. Most slavery, ancient and modern, was actually a form of kidnapping, the taking and imprisoning of a person against their will. As regulated in the Bible, as practiced in some other ancient cultures, slavery was received willingly, usually as a payment for debt, or in the case of war, as an alternate to death. So what did they do with those that were worthy of death a lot of times? You want to fight? I got a place for you. How about, excuse me, Jeremy, downtown Afghanistan? So, okay, that's what it's getting at, though. You got a choice. If you want to fight, I got a place for you. Let's just see how bad you are. Okay? Back and say, what I do. In ancient Israel, other cultures were not kidnapped and enslaved as was the practice in the African slave trade. So that's what's going on here. Okay. And I'm gonna have to stop right here. We got to get ready for the worship service, and so we'll pick up there next week. And like I say, as this unfolds, it's gonna get more interesting before it gets any duller. Okay, so we'll get ready for the worship service.